The convoy rolled through the dusty streets of Kandahar as the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos sat in the passenger seat of the lead Humvee, her M4 carbine resting across her lap. To anyone watching, she looked like just another soldier on routine patrol. Her gear was standard issue, her posture relaxed but alert. Nothing about her appearance suggested she was one of the deadliest marksmen the United States Army had ever trained. The radio crackled with routine chatter from base command. "Alpha Team, this is Overwatch. How's the neighborhood looking today?" Sergeant First Class Mike Rodriguez, the team leader, grabbed the handset. "Overwatch, Alpha Team. All quiet on the Western Front. Just another milk run through downtown paradise." Maria smiled slightly at Rodriguez's sarcasm. She'd been with Alpha Team for 8 months now, ever since being reassigned from her previous unit. The guys had accepted her easily enough, though they had no idea about her true capabilities. Her file listed her as an infantry specialist with marksman training. It didn't mention the 2 years she'd spent at Fort Benning Sniper School or the classified operations she'd run in Syria before her transfer. The Army had reasons for keeping certain soldiers' backgrounds quiet. Maria's record showed standard deployment rotations and routine assignments. What it didn't show were the 43 confirmed kills she'd made during 18 months of counter-sniper operations in Damascus. The brass decided her skills would be more valuable if potential enemies underestimated her. Private First Class Tommy Chun, barely 22, and on his first deployment, sat behind Maria, nervously checking his weapon for the 5th time in 10 minutes. "You think we'll see any action today, Sergeant Santos?" "Hope not, Chun," Maria replied, scanning the rooftops out of habit. "Boring patrols are good patrols. Means everyone goes home for dinner." But even as she said it, Maria felt the familiar tingle at the base of her neck that had saved her life more times than she could count. Something wasn't right about today's patrol route. The streets were too empty. In a city where children usually played soccer in every available space and vendors hawked their wares on every corner, the absence of civilian activity was glaring. Corporal Jake Williams, the driver, noticed it too. "Where is everybody? This place is usually crawling with people." Rodriguez was already reaching for the radio when the first shot rang out. The bullet struck the windshield of their Humvee, spiderwebbing the bulletproof glass, but not penetrating. Williams immediately yanked the steering wheel hard left, tires screaming as he tried to get them out of the kill zone. More shots erupted from multiple directions, the distinctive crack of AK-47s mixing with the heavier thump of a PK machine gun. "Contact front! Contact front!" Rodriguez shouted into the radio. "Multiple shooters, grid reference 77 Alpha. We need backup now." The second Humvee in their convoy had already taken evasive action, pulling behind a concrete barrier about 50 meters back. Maria could see Sergeant Davis and his team taking defensive positions, returning fire at muzzle flashes visible in the windows of surrounding buildings. Their own vehicle lurched to a stop behind an abandoned car. Williams had found the only decent cover available, but Maria knew it wouldn't last long. The machine gun fire was getting closer, chunks of concrete and metal flying as bullets ate away at their protection. "We're sitting ducks here," Chun yelled, his voice cracking with fear and adrenaline. Rodriguez was trying to coordinate with the second vehicle and call in support, but the radio chatter was chaotic. Multiple units across the city were reporting contact simultaneously. This wasn't a random ambush. It was a coordinated attack designed to tie up American forces and prevent rapid response. Maria's mind was already shifting into the zone she knew so well. Time seemed to slow as her training took over. She mentally cataloged every muzzle flash, every position where enemy fire was originating. 3 shooters on the second floor of the apartment building to their northeast. 2 more on the roof of the market building directly ahead. At least 1 machine gunner in the minaret of the small mosque to their left, using the ancient structure's thick walls for protection. "Rodriguez," she called over the gunfire. "I need to get a higher ground." "Negative, Santos. We hold position until backup arrives." Another burst from the machine gun stitched across their cover. Maria could hear Williams cursing creatively as he tried to make himself smaller behind the engine block. This was exactly the kind of situation her training was designed for, but her teammates had no idea what she was capable of. She keyed her radio to the frequency she wasn't supposed to know existed. Raven's Nest, this is Ghost 7. Authentication code, Whiskey Tango 44. A different voice came back immediately, crisp and professional. Ghost 7, Raven's Nest. Authentication confirmed. What's your status? Pinned down with conventional infantry. Multiple elevated threats. Request permission to go hunting. There was a brief pause. Ghost 7, you are cleared hot. Rules of engagement are weapons free. Paint the targets. Rodriguez looked at her strangely. He'd never heard that call sign before, and Maria's voice had taken on a different quality. Cold, professional, deadly calm in the middle of the firefight. Maria started checking her gear with movements that were suddenly different from her usual casual efficiency. Her hands moved with practiced precision as she verified her equipment. Most importantly, she confirmed that her M4 was loaded with the special ammunition she carried, 77 grain match-grade rounds that she'd hand-loaded herself for maximum accuracy. Santos, what the hell are you doing? Rodriguez demanded. My job, she replied simply. She slung her rifle and started moving toward the front of their position. Keep their heads down for 30 seconds. I need to reach that building. She pointed to a 3-story structure about 40 meters away. It was partially collapsed from some previous conflict, but the damage actually worked in her favor. The rubble would provide concealment for her movement and elevation for clean shots. You'll never make it across that street. Maria was already moving. She sprinted from cover just as Williams and Chin opened up with suppressing fire. The enemy shooters ducked instinctively, giving her the few seconds she needed. She covered the distance in a combat rush that would have impressed her instructors at sniper school. Low, fast, and using every piece of available cover. She reached the building and immediately began climbing through the debris. Her movements were spider-quick and nearly silent. This was where 2 years of urban combat training showed. She knew instinctively which pieces of rubble would hold her weight and which would shift and give away her position. From the second floor of the ruined building, Maria had clear lines of sight to 4 of the enemy positions. She settled into a firing stance behind a chunk of concrete that provided perfect support for her rifle. This was what she'd been born to do. Through her scope, she could see the machine gunner in the minaret clearly. He was young, maybe 18, with the confident posture of someone who thought he was untouchable behind those thick walls. He had no idea that Maria was already calculating range, wind drift, and the slight adjustment needed for the different elevation. The first shot broke the afternoon's silence like thunder. The machine gun immediately went quiet. Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio. Santos, where the hell are you? We just lost the machine gun. She was already shifting to her next target. 2 shooters on the apartment building roof had exposed themselves while trying to get a better angle on the American position. Maria's second shot came 4 seconds after the first. One of the roof shooters spun and disappeared from view. The remaining shooter on the roof realized they were under attack from a new direction and tried to find cover behind an air conditioning unit. It wasn't enough. Maria's third shot found him anyway. She moved to a new position within the building. Never shoot from the same spot twice. That was sniper school lesson number 1. Enemy fighters were starting to realize there was a marksman in play, and return fire was beginning to search the building where she was hidden. From her new position, she had a perfect angle on the apartment building where 3 shooters were still active. They were firing through windows, thinking the walls would protect them. Against ordinary infantry weapons, they would have been right. But Maria wasn't using ordinary weapons or ordinary tactics. Her fourth shot took the leftmost shooter just as he was leaning out to fire. The other 2 immediately pulled back from their windows, but Maria had already marked their positions. She waited with the patience that separated real snipers from merely good marksmen. 30 seconds passed. A minute. The two remaining shooters thought they were safe. When they finally edged back toward their windows, Maria was ready. 2 shots, fired 3 seconds apart, and the apartment building fell silent. The entire engagement had taken less than 2 minutes. 6 enemy shooters eliminated with 6 shots. The street that had been filled with deadly crossfire just moments before was suddenly, eerily quiet. Rodriguez's voice came over the radio, filled with confusion and growing suspicion. "Santos, report your status. We need to know your position." Maria was already moving again, this time working her way back toward the team. But as she reached the ground floor of the ruined building, she heard new sounds that made her freeze. Vehicle engines. Multiple vehicles moving fast, coming from the direction of their base. She keyed her radio again. Raven's Nest, Ghost 7. Initial targets neutralized. Hearing friendly vehicles approaching from the south. Negative, Ghost 7. No friendly units dispatched to your location. All available assets are responding to coordinated attacks across the sector. Those are not friendlies. Maria's blood went cold. If those weren't American vehicles coming toward them, and all the immediate threats had been eliminated, that meant one thing. This had been a setup from the beginning. Someone had wanted Alpha Team in this specific location at this specific time. She broke into a run, reaching her team's position just as 3 technical vehicles, pickup trucks with mounted heavy weapons, rounded the corner at the far end of the street. These weren't the same fighters she'd just eliminated. These were better equipped, better organized, and they'd been waiting for the perfect moment to spring their trap. "Incoming vehicles!" she shouted as she slid back into cover with her team. 3 technicals, heavy weapons mounted. Rodriguez stared at her as she settled into position. There was something different about Santos now. The way she moved, the way she held her weapon, even the way she spoke. This wasn't the same soldier who'd been making small talk with Chin 15 minutes earlier. "Santos," he said quietly, "who the hell are you?" But there wasn't time for explanations. The lead technical was already firing, its mounted machine gun raking their position. The abandoned car they'd been using for cover was being systematically destroyed, metal fragments flying like shrapnel. Maria raised her rifle and settled into a firing position that looked completely different from her usual stance. This was the posture of someone who'd spent years perfecting the art of long-range precision shooting. Her breathing slowed, her heartbeat steadied, and time seemed to stop as she acquired her target. The driver of the lead technical had made a mistake. He was sitting high in his seat, thinking he was out of range of effective rifle fire. He wasn't accounting for a sniper using match-grade ammunition and shooting skills that had taken 2 years to perfect. Maria's shot took him cinemass. The technical immediately swerved out of control, its machine gunner thrown off balance as the vehicle crashed into a concrete barrier. But even as that threat was neutralized, Maria could see movement on the rooftops around them. The coordinated attack was far from over, and she was beginning to realize that Alpha Team had been specifically targeted for reasons that went far beyond a routine patrol gone wrong. Rodriguez was shouting orders and calling for backup, but Maria could hear in his voice that he was starting to understand they were dealing with something much bigger than a simple ambush. As the sound of more vehicles approached from multiple directions, she knew the real fight was just beginning. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a cold certainty was growing. Someone had known exactly who she was and had planned this entire operation around drawing her out. The question was whether they understood what they'd just unleashed. The sound of approaching vehicles grew louder as Maria pressed herself against the concrete barrier, her mind racing through tactical assessments. Rodriguez was still staring at her with a mixture of confusion and dawning realization. The woman who'd been quietly riding shotgun on routine patrols for 8 months had just eliminated 6 enemy shooters with surgical precision. "Santos," Rodriguez said quietly, his voice barely audible over the distant rumble of engines. "I need to know what's really going on here." Before Maria could answer, her radio crackled with a transmission on the frequency she wasn't supposed to be monitoring. "All units be advised. High-value target designation Ghost 7 is active in Sector 77 Alpha. Operational security protocols are now in effect. Rodriguez heard it too. His eyes widened as the implications hit him. Ghost 7? That's you, isn't it? Maria nodded grimly. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, formerly designated Ghost 7, Counter-Sniper Operations, Damascus Theater. I was reassigned to regular infantry to maintain operational security. She checked her ammunition count. 24 rounds remaining. Someone just blew that security wide open. Private Chun, who'd been listening with growing amazement, spoke up. You mean you're like a real sniper? Like the ones in the movies? Better, Williams muttered, looking at the technical vehicle Maria had just disabled with a single shot. Way better. Maria was already analyzing their tactical situation. The 3 technical vehicles had split up, trying to surround their position. 2 more were taking up positions to cut off their escape routes, while the 3rd was moving to flank them from the east. But what worried her more were the figures she could see moving on the rooftops, at least 8 additional shooters taking up Overwatch positions. This wasn't a random attack, or even a well-planned ambush. This was a carefully orchestrated operation designed to eliminate a specific target. Her, Rodriguez, she said, her voice taking on the command authority that came from years of leading high-stakes missions. I need you to listen very carefully. This entire operation is designed to kill me specifically. They know who I am and what I can do. That means they've been planning this for months. Why would they target you specifically? Maria's expression darkened. Because in Damascus, I eliminated 43 enemy snipers, including several who were considered untouchable by conventional forces. Someone wants revenge, and they're willing to sacrifice your entire team to get it. The implications hit Rodriguez like a physical blow. His men were expendable collateral damage in someone else's war. What do we do? We survive, Maria said simply. But it's going to require you to trust me completely and follow my lead without questions. Can you do that? Rodriguez looked at his team. Williams behind the wheel, trying to make himself invisible. Chun, barely out of basic training, struggling to control his fear, and Maria, who was suddenly radiating the kind of lethal competence that came from years of fighting a very different kind of war. What do you need? Maria was already moving, pulling equipment from her pack that Rodriguez hadn't seen before. A rangefinder. Special ammunition marked with codes he didn't recognize. A spotting scope that looked far more advanced than standard issue gear. First, we need to break their encirclement before they complete it. Second vehicle, northeast position. That's our priority target. She settled into a firing position with movements that were suddenly mechanical in their precision. When I engage, Williams needs to be ready to move on my signal. We're going to punch through their line and find better defensive ground. Through her scope, Maria could see the crew of the 2nd Technical clearly. The gunner was young, confident, probably thinking he was part of an easy kill operation. He had no idea he was about to learn why the Syrian rebels had put a $50,000 bounty on Ghost 7's head. The range was 380 meters, a challenging shot under normal circumstances, nearly impossible with a standard M4 carbine. But Maria's weapon had been quietly modified during her previous assignment. The trigger group was custom, the barrel was free-floating and match-grade, and the scope was military-grade precision optics that officially didn't exist. She controlled her breathing, let her heart rate settle, and calculated wind drift based on the dust patterns she could see swirling in the street. The shot broke like glass, clean and perfect. The gunner on the Technical dropped instantly, his weapon clattering onto the truck bed. Move! 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 Maria shouted. Williams had the engine running before her, shot finished echoing. The Humvee lurched forward, tires screaming as they broke from cover and raced toward the gap Maria had just created. Return fire erupted from multiple positions, but Williams was driving with the kind of controlled desperation that kept them alive. They reached the intersection, and Williams yanked the wheel hard right, putting a row of buildings between them and most of the enemy positions. But Maria knew they'd bought themselves maybe 2 minutes before the net closed again. There. She pointed to a compound about 200 meters ahead. That building has good sight lines and defensive positions. Get us there. As Williams navigated the narrow streets, Maria was already planning her next moves. The radio chatter she was monitoring told her this operation was bigger than just the vehicles they'd seen. At least 12 fighters were involved in the immediate area, with more providing overwatch and security. This was a professional operation, probably planned by someone with military training. The compound Maria had spotted was perfect, a two-story building with thick walls, multiple firing positions, and clear fields of view in all directions. It had probably been a police station or government building before the war, built to withstand exactly this kind of assault. They reached the compound just as the enemy technical vehicles began converging on their previous position. Williams drove straight through the gates, and the team immediately began establishing defensive positions. Chun, Williams, take the ground floor windows. Watch our flanks, Maria ordered, her command voice leaving no room for argument. Rodriguez, you're with me on the second floor. We need overwatch on the main approaches. As they moved through the building, Rodriguez couldn't help but notice how Maria moved differently now. Every step was purposeful, every glance calculated. She wasn't the quiet, competent soldier he'd known for 8 months. This was someone who'd spent years learning to hunt and kill in urban environments. On the second floor, Maria quickly identified the best firing positions. Rodriguez, take that window on the east side. You're watching for flanking movements. I need the north window. That's where they'll make their main approach. Through her scope, Maria could see the enemy forces regrouping. They were good, better than the average insurgent cell. Their movement patterns showed military training, and they were using proper bounding overwatch techniques as they advanced. But they'd made one critical mistake. They were treating her like a normal infantry soldier instead of a trained sniper. They were advancing in groups, using cover that would stop rifle fire, but not precision shots from an elevated position. Rodriguez, she said quietly, when I start shooting, things are going to happen very fast. The sound signature of my weapon is different from standard M4S. They're going to realize immediately that they're facing a marksman. That's when they'll start using real tactics. The first group of enemy fighters reached the intersection about 300 meters away. Maria could see 3 men moving in standard fire and advanced formation. Good technique, but they were exposed for the few seconds it took to bound between cover positions. Her first shot dropped the lead fighter mid-stride. The other 2 immediately went to ground, but one had chosen cover behind a concrete planter that was only 18 inches tall. Adequate concealment from ground level, useless against an elevated marksman. Her second shot came 8 seconds later. The third fighter, realizing his position was compromised, tried to retreat to better cover. Maria led him by 2 feet and squeezed the trigger just as he reached the corner of a building. The effect on the remaining enemy forces was immediate. She could hear shouting in Arabic over the radio frequencies they were using, orders to fall back, regroup, and identify the sniper position. Someone with tactical knowledge was now directing their operation. Santos, Rodriguez called from his position, I've got movement on the east side. At least 4 fighters, moving house to house. Maria was already shifting position. Keep eyes on them, but don't engage unless they get within 100 meters. I need to deal with the main group first. But as she settled into her new firing position, she saw something that made her blood run cold. A figure on a rooftop about 600 meters away was setting up what looked like a sniper rifle. Not an AK-47 or even a designated marksman rifle. This was a proper sniper system, complete with bipod and high magnification scope. Counter sniper, she muttered, speaking into her radio. Raven's Nest, Ghost 7. Be advised, enemy has deployed precision marksman. Grid reference 77 Alpha 4. Copy, Ghost 7. Intelligence suggests enemy sniper is former Syrian army, trained in Russia. Designation, White Fox. 40-plus confirmed kills against coalition forces. Maria felt a chill that had nothing to do with the late afternoon air. White Fox was a legend among Middle Eastern snipers, a ghost who'd been operating since the early days of the Syrian conflict. If he was here, this operation was even more serious than she'd thought. Through her scope, she could see him working methodically, setting up his shot. His position was strong, good cover, excellent fields of fire, and far enough away that most soldiers wouldn't even be able to see him clearly. He was probably assuming she was just another American infantry soldier who'd gotten lucky with a few shots. He was about to learn otherwise. The duel that followed would determine whether Alpha Team lived or died. Maria knew that White Fox was probably the most dangerous opponent she'd ever faced. But he'd made one crucial error. He didn't know that the American soldier he was hunting had spent 2 years being trained by the best sniper instructors in the world specifically to hunt people like him. She began her stalk through the building, moving to a position where she could engage him without being silhouetted against a window. This was the moment her training had been building toward, a precision engagement against a skilled opponent who was actively hunting her. The afternoon sun was beginning to cast long shadows across the city, and Maria knew that darkness would change the tactical situation completely. She had perhaps 30 minutes of good shooting light left. After that, this fight would become something entirely different. Through her scope, she could see White Fox had finished his setup and was beginning to scan for targets. His rifle was trained on the building where Alpha Team had taken cover. In a few minutes, he would have identified her position, and the game would truly begin. Maria controlled her breathing and began the slow, careful process of acquiring her most dangerous target yet. Maria moved through the second floor of the compound like a shadow, her every step calculated to avoid detection. She'd identified 3 potential firing positions that would give her a clear shot at White Fox, but she needed to choose carefully. A sniper of his reputation would be watching for exactly the kind of movement patterns she was about to make. The first position was the most obvious, a corner room with large windows facing north. Too obvious. White Fox would expect her to use it and would already have it prearranged. The second position was better, but had poor escape routes if she needed to relocate quickly. That left the third option, a partially collapsed section of the building where an old mortar strike had blown out a portion of the exterior wall. The damage actually worked in her favor, providing natural camouflage and an unconventional angle that White Fox wouldn't expect. Maria settled into position behind the rubble, using chunks of concrete and twisted rebar to create a stable shooting platform. Through her scope, she studied her target with the patience that separated professional snipers from everyone else. White Fox had chosen his position well, a water tower on a rooftop approximately 650 meters away. The tower provided excellent cover and elevation, but it also limited his mobility. Once he'd committed to that position, he couldn't easily relocate without exposing himself. Maria began her range calculations. 650 meters was at the outer edge of her M4's effective range, even with match-grade ammunition. Wind speed was approximately 8 miles per hour, coming from the southwest. The late afternoon sun was behind her, which meant it might create glare issues for White Fox, but wouldn't affect her shot. She was in the middle of her calculations when Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio from his position downstairs. "Santos, we've got movement. The flanking team is getting close. I count 5 fighters, maybe 6. Maria keyed her radio without taking her eye off the scope. How close? 150 meters. Moving house to house, but they're being careful about it. Professional movement. Maria realized she was facing the classic sniper's dilemma. Engage the immediate threat and reveal her position to the counter-sniper, or deal with the counter-sniper first and risk having her teammates overrun by the flanking force. Either choice could be fatal, but as she watched White Fox through her scope, she noticed something that made the decision for her. He was scanning in a methodical pattern, working from left to right across the compound, where Alpha Team was positioned. In about 30 seconds, his search would bring him to her actual position. If she waited much longer, he would spot her first. Maria settled into her final firing position. At this range, with these conditions, she would have exactly one shot. Miss, and White Fox would immediately identify her location and return fire with a weapon system significantly more powerful than hers. She controlled her breathing and let her heart rate slow. Through the scope, she could see White Fox clearly now, middle-aged, bearded, wearing a desert camouflage uniform that looked Syrian army standard. His movements were economical and professional as he adjusted his position for what was probably going to be his first shot at her building. Maria's crosshairs settled on center mass. At this range, trying for a headshot would be showing off, and showing off got snipers killed. Center mass was a larger target and just as effective. The shot broke clean and true. Through her scope, Maria saw White Fox's rifle suddenly shift skyward as he slumped forward over his weapon. She'd hit him center mass, just as planned. The immediate counter-sniper threat was neutralized, but her shot had also announced her position to every enemy fighter in the area. She was already moving to a new location when the first return fire began impacting the building. AK-47 rounds chipped away at the concrete around her previous position, followed by the heavier thump of a machine gun. "Rodriguez," she called in her radio as she moved. "Status on those flankers. They just accelerated their approach. I think they heard your shot." Maria reached a new firing position on the opposite side of the building just as the flanking team broke cover and made their final approach. She could see them clearly now, 5 fighters in military-style gear, moving with the kind of coordination that spoke of serious training. They were advancing in a modified wedge formation, with one fighter slightly ahead acting as point man and the others providing overlapping fields of fire. Good tactics, but they made the same mistake as the others. They were treating this like a conventional firefight instead of a precision engagement. Maria's first shot dropped the point man as he reached the corner of a building 50 meters from the compound. The others immediately went to ground, but their training betrayed them. They'd chosen firing positions that were tactically sound for engaging infantry, but exposed them to a marksman shooting from elevation. Her second shot came 6 seconds later, taking the fighter who'd positioned himself behind a concrete barrier that provided excellent cover from ground level, but no protection from her elevated angle. The remaining 3 fighters realized they were being engaged by someone with significantly better training than they'd expected. She watched them through her scope as they tried to coordinate a new approach. They were good, probably former Syrian army or maybe even Republican Guard, but they were fighting according to tactics designed for conventional warfare, not the kind of individual precision engagement that Maria had been trained for. The third fighter made his mistake when he tried to use a parked car for cover. Maria could see him clearly through the vehicle's windows. Her shot took him as he was moving between the car and a doorway, thinking he was screened from view. The 2 remaining fighters finally realized what they were up against. She could hear them shouting to each other in Arabic, and their tones suggested they were trying to coordinate a withdrawal. But they'd advanced too far into the engagement zone. There was no good cover between their current position and the nearest building that could provide real protection. One of them tried to make a break for it, sprinting between cover points in a serpentine pattern that showed real training. But Maria had been taught to engage moving targets by some of the best instructors in the world. She led him by 3 feet and squeezed the trigger just as he reached what he thought was safety. The last fighter, realizing he was alone and facing a marksman who'd just eliminated his entire team, did something that surprised Maria. Instead of trying to escape or surrender, he shouldered his AK-47 and began advancing directly toward the compound, firing on full automatic. It was a brave move, but tactically suicidal. Maria's final shot of the engagement took him center mass as he reached the compound's outer wall. The flanking attack was over. Rodriguez's voice came over the radio, filled with awe. "Santos, I've got eyes on 5 down in the eastern approach." That was incredible. But Maria was already analyzing the larger tactical situation. The elimination of White Fox and the flanking team had probably broken the back of the coordinated attack, but there were still enemy fighters in the area. More importantly, she just revealed her capabilities to anyone who was monitoring the engagement. Her radio crackled with a transmission on the frequency she wasn't supposed to be using. Ghost 7, this is Raven's Nest. We've been monitoring your engagement. Outstanding work on the counter-sniper elimination. Raven's Nest, Ghost 7. Immediate threat neutralized, but we need extraction. This position is compromised. Negative on extraction, Ghost 7. All available assets are tied up with coordinated attacks across the sector. You're going to have to hold your position until we can get birds in the air. Maria felt a chill of realization. The attacks across the sector weren't random. They were designed specifically to prevent rapid response to her location. Someone had planned this operation with intimate knowledge of American response protocols and asset deployment patterns. How long until extraction is possible? Minimum 2 hours, possibly longer. Can you hold? Maria looked around the compound, calculating ammunition, defensive positions, and the likelihood that more enemy forces were en route. 2 hours was a long time to hold a static position against an enemy who now knew exactly where she was. "We'll hold," she said simply. But as she began preparing for what was likely to be a long night, Maria heard something that made her blood run cold. Vehicle engines again, but this time coming from multiple directions. The sound signature was different too. Heavier vehicles, probably armored. She moved to a window that provided overwatch of the main approaches and immediately understood how much trouble they were in. 3 armored personnel carriers were approaching from different directions, moving with the kind of coordination that spoke of professional military training. This wasn't another flanking attack or even a heavy assault. This was the arrival of the main force, probably Syrian army regulars or Republican Guard units who'd been brought in specifically to deal with her. Rodriguez appeared at her position, his face grim. "Santos, Williams is monitoring enemy radio chatter. He speaks some Arabic. Says they're calling in heavy weapons." Maria nodded grimly. The first phase of the battle was over, and she'd won decisively. But the enemy had just escalated to a completely different level of warfare. The question now wasn't whether she could outshoot individual fighters. It was whether Alpha Team could survive a full military assault with limited ammunition and no air support. She checked her ammunition count. 14 rounds remaining in her rifle, plus 2 more magazines. Against armored vehicles and what sounded like at least company-strength opposition, it wasn't going to be enough. But as she watched the armored carriers take up positions around the compound, Maria began to smile grimly. The enemy commanders had made a crucial mistake. They were so focused on the reputation of Go 7 that they'd committed major assets to eliminate one sniper. That meant these vehicles and the troops they carried weren't available for other operations. More importantly, they were now fighting her kind of fight. Urban combat, defensive positions, precision engagement against superior numbers. This was exactly what she'd been trained for during those 2 years in Damascus. The real battle was about to begin. The 3 armored personnel carriers had taken up positions in a triangular formation around the compound, each one positioned to cover a different approach. Maria studied them through her scope, analyzing their strengths and weaknesses with the methodical precision that had kept her alive through 18 months of urban warfare. Soviet-era BTR-80s, she noted. 8-wheeled armored vehicles with 14.5mm machine guns mounted in turrets. Heavily armored against small arms fire, but not invulnerable if you knew where to aim. More importantly, each carrier probably held 8 to 10 soldiers, meaning Alpha Team was now facing at least 30 enemy fighters with military training and proper equipment. Rodriguez appeared at her position, keeping low to avoid being spotted through the windows. "Santos, we need to talk about our situation here." Williams did a count on the radio chatter. "Sounds like they've got at least 2 companies converging on our position." Maria didn't look away from her scope as she responded. 2 companies means they're taking this seriously. That's good news and bad news. How was that good news? Because it means they're committed. All those troops and vehicles can't be used anywhere else right now. We've just tied up a significant enemy force. She finally turned to look at Rodriguez, and he could see something in her eyes that was both reassuring and terrifying. The bad news is we're probably going to die here unless I can think of something clever. Before Rodriguez could respond, the compound shook as the first artillery round impacted somewhere in the courtyard. Maria immediately recognized the sound signature. 82 millimeters mortar, probably fired from a position about 2 kilometers away. They weren't just facing direct assault anymore. The enemy had called in indirect fire support. Basement, Maria shouted into her radio. Everyone to the basement now. They're dropping mortars on us. The team quickly relocated to the building's lower level, which provided better protection against indirect fire. But Maria knew this was exactly what the enemy wanted: pin them down with mortars while the armored vehicles moved into assault positions. From the basement windows, she could see the BTR-80s beginning to advance. They were moving in a coordinated pattern, with one vehicle providing overwatch while the others bounded forward to new positions. Professional tactics that would be nearly impossible to counter with conventional infantry weapons. But Maria wasn't thinking like conventional infantry anymore. She was thinking like the precision marksman she'd been trained to be, looking for the weaknesses that existed in every system if you knew where to look. The first BTR had moved to within 200 meters of the compound and was taking up a hull-down position behind a concrete barrier. The commander was visible in the turret hatch, directing his gunners' fire against the building's upper floors. Through her scope, Maria could see him clearly. Middle-aged, Syrian army uniform, probably a captain or major based on his confidence and the way other soldiers were taking orders from him. At 200 meters, with the target stationary and exposed from the chest up, it was actually a relatively easy shot for someone with her training. But Maria hesitated. Killing an armored vehicle commander wouldn't stop the assault. It would just make the remaining enemy forces more cautious and probably more violent. She needed something that would change the entire tactical equation. That's when she noticed the fuel truck. About 400 meters away, partially hidden behind a damaged building, she could see a military fuel tanker that had probably been part of the enemy convoy. It was positioned to provide refueling support for the armored vehicles during extended operations. More importantly, it was exactly the kind of high-value target that could turn a tactical situation around. Maria calculated the shot carefully. 400 meters to a stationary target wasn't particularly challenging, but the fuel truck's tank was protected by steel plating that would require precise shot placement. She needed to hit the tank at exactly the right angle to penetrate the armor and create the kind of secondary explosion that would get everyone's attention. Rodriguez, she called quietly, I need you to create a distraction. Get Williams and try to put some fire on that BTR position in about 30 seconds. Not accurate fire, just enough to get their heads down. What are you planning? Something that's either going to save us or get us killed faster. Maria was already moving to a new position that would give her the angle she needed for the fuel truck shot. On my mark, have them open up with everything they've got. She settled into her firing position, using a concrete support pillar to steady her rifle. Through the scope, she could see the fuel truck clearly now. The tank was positioned at an angle that would allow her to hit the side armor at a 90-degree angle, maximizing the chance of penetration. The shot would have to be perfect, miss or fail to penetrate, and she just revealed her position to an entire company of Syrian army regulars. Mark, she called in her radio. Williams and Chen opened up with their M4S, sending a stream of automatic fire toward the nearest BTR position. The vehicle's commander immediately ducked down into his hatch, and the attention of every enemy soldier in the area focused on the obvious source of fire. Maria took her shot. The bullet struck the fuel truck's tank exactly where she'd aimed, penetrating the steel plating and disappearing into the volatile mixture inside. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the entire vehicle disappeared in a massive fireball that sent a mushroom cloud of black smoke hundreds of feet into the air. The explosion was spectacular enough, but the tactical effect was even better. The BTR closest to the fuel truck was immediately engulfed in burning fuel, its crew bailing out and running for cover as their vehicle became uninhabitable. The other two vehicles backed away rapidly, their commanders suddenly, uncertain about what other surprises the Americans might have prepared. More importantly, the massive explosion had created exactly the kind of chaos that Maria needed to turn a defensive battle into something more aggressive. "Rodriguez," she called. "We're moving." That explosion just gave us a smoke screen and confused their coordination. "We need to relocate before they figure out what happened." But even as the team prepared to move, Maria could hear new sounds that told her the battle was entering yet another phase. Helicopter rotors, approaching from the south. The sound signature was wrong for American aircraft. These were enemy helicopters, probably Syrian Army Mi-24 Hinds coming to provide close air support. Attack helicopters changed everything. The compound that had provided excellent protection against ground forces would be a death trap against aerial assault. They needed to move, and they needed to move now. "Williams," Maria shouted, "get the vehicle running. We're leaving through the back gate in 30 seconds." As the team prepared for what would essentially be a combat escape, Maria realized that the enemy had just made their first major tactical error. By bringing in helicopters to deal with what they thought was a trapped infantry squad, they'd committed expensive, limited assets to a single engagement. But they still didn't understand what they were really fighting. Maria wasn't just a sniper. She'd been trained in all aspects of asymmetric warfare, including anti-aircraft tactics using small arms. During her time in Damascus, she'd successfully engaged 3 Syrian helicopters using nothing but a precision rifle and carefully chosen ammunition. As the sound of rotors grew louder, she checked her ammunition load one more time. 8 rounds remaining in her current magazine, plus 1 more full magazine. Against attack helicopters, it would have to be enough. The Humvee's engine roared to life just as the first Mi-24 Hind appeared over the compound's eastern wall. The helicopter was flying low and slow, its pilot probably thinking he was dealing with demoralized infantry who would be easy targets for his 12.7mm machine guns. He was about to learn otherwise. Maria was already in position as Williams gunned the Humvee toward the compound's rear exit. Through the vehicle's open window, she acquired the helicopter in her scope just as it began its attack run. The pilot was flying with the confidence of someone who'd never been effectively engaged by ground forces. Maria's shot took the pilot through the cockpit glass at a range of less than 150 meters. The Hind immediately pitched forward and to the right, its rotor wash creating a dust storm as it crashed into the compound's courtyard in a spectacular explosion that sent debris flying in all directions. The second helicopter, seeing his wingman go down, immediately pulled up and began a more cautious approach. But the damage was done. Maria had just demonstrated that Alpha Team was far more dangerous than anyone had realized. As Williams drove them through the compound's rear gate and into the narrow streets beyond, Maria could hear radio chatter erupting across all the enemy frequencies. The engagement had gone from a routine elimination operation to something approaching a military disaster for the Syrian forces. But she also knew that the enemy response would escalate accordingly. They just lost an armored vehicle, a fuel truck, an attack helicopter, and approximately 25 soldiers to what was supposed to be a simple ambush operation. The commanders coordinating this operation would now throw everything they had at eliminating Alpha Team. Rodriguez, who'd been monitoring the radio traffic, looked at Maria with something approaching awe. "Santos, they're calling in everything. Artillery, more helicopters, even talking about airstrikes. What the hell did you do in Damascus to make them want you dead this badly?" Maria checked her weapon and prepared for the running battle that was almost certainly coming. "I convinced them that American snipers were something they needed to be afraid of. Apparently, they haven't forgotten." As Williams navigated the narrow streets, trying to put distance between them and the compound, Maria was already planning their next moves. The enemy would expect them to try for extraction or to hole up in another defensive position. Instead, she was thinking about taking this fight to them. After all, they just revealed the location of their command elements, their helicopter assets, and their response patterns. For someone with her training, that information was more valuable than any amount of defensive advantage. The real hunt was about to begin. Williams drove through the narrow streets with controlled desperation, taking turns that threw dust clouds behind them while Maria analyzed the tactical situation. Behind them, she could hear the remaining Mi-24 Hind circling at a cautious distance, its pilot now treating them as a serious threat rather than easy prey. "Rodriguez," she said, studying the map she'd pulled from her pack. "Where's the nearest high ground with good overwatch positions?" "There's an old water treatment plant about 2 kilometers northwest. 3-story building, good fields of fire. But Santos, they'll have that area covered. It's too obvious." Maria smiled grimly. "Exactly. They'll expect us to go there, which means they'll position their command elements where they can coordinate the response. That's where we're going to hunt them." Rodriguez stared at her. "Hunt them? We're talking about running away, right? Getting to an extraction point." "Negative. We're talking about ending this." Maria's voice had taken on the cold professionalism that had made her reputation in Damascus. "They brought company-strength forces to eliminate one sniper. That tells me their command structure is personally invested in this operation, which means the people planning this are probably forward deployed where they can watch the results." She keyed her radio to the frequency she wasn't supposed to be using. "Raven's Nest, Ghost 7. Request immediate intelligence on enemy command locations. Grid reference 77 Alpha through Charlie." Ghost 7 intelligence assets are tracking multiple enemy communications hubs. Strongest signal source appears to be co-located with Syrian Army Mobile Command Post, approximately 1.5 kilometers northwest of your current position. "Perfect," Maria muttered. "Williams, change of destination. Head for the water treatment plant. But we're not going there to hide." As they drove, Maria explained her plan. The enemy had made a classic mistake in asymmetric warfare. They'd concentrated their forces and command structure to deal with a single perceived threat. But concentration made an organization vulnerable to precision attack. If she could eliminate their command elements, the entire operation would collapse into confusion. "Santos," Chin spoke up from the back seat. "They've got to have security around their command post. We're talking about 4 people against an entire company. 4 people, one of whom is trained specifically to hunt high-value targets in urban environments," Maria corrected. "The key is not to fight their whole force. The key is to identify the right targets and eliminate them before they can coordinate a response." The radio crackled with a transmission that made everyone in the vehicle freeze. "All units, this is Colonel Kassem. The American sniper is to be taken alive, if possible. Intelligence wants to interrogate her about Damascus operations. All units acknowledge." Rodriguez looked at Maria with dawning understanding. "They know who you are, specifically, which confirms this entire operation was planned around eliminating me personally." Maria checked her ammunition one final time. 7 rounds in this magazine, plus 1 more. 14 shots to end a company-size operation. Williams was approaching the industrial area where the water treatment plant was located when Maria spotted what she'd been looking for. A cluster of vehicles about 800 meters away, positioned on high ground with clear sight lines to the treatment plant. 3 BTR, 80 armored carriers in a defensive formation around 2 command vehicles, and a communications truck bristling with antennas. "There," she pointed. "That's their command post. They're positioned to coordinate the assault on the treatment plant because they expect us to hole up there." But instead of heading toward the plant, Maria directed Williams to a partially collapsed office building about 600 meters from the enemy command post. The building provided excellent concealment and multiple firing positions with clear lines of sight to the enemy position. As the team established themselves in the building, Maria began what she did best: hunting. Through her scope, she could see the enemy command post clearly. Syrian Army officers were moving between the vehicles, coordinating what was probably going to be a massive assault on the water treatment plant. They had no idea that their target was already in position and preparing to engage. Maria identified her primary target immediately: a Syrian Army colonel standing next to the communications truck, pointing at maps and issuing orders to subordinate officers. Everything about his body language and the way other soldiers deferred to him suggested he was the operation commander. Colonel Kassem, she realized. The voice from the radio transmission. At 600 meters, against a stationary target in good light, the shot was well within her capabilities. But Maria waited. She'd learned in Damascus that patience was often more important than marksmanship. She needed to understand the full command structure before she started eliminating targets. Watching through her scope, she identified a second high-value target, a major who appeared to be the operations tactical coordinator, moving between positions and directing the placement of supporting weapons. A third officer was clearly the communications specialist, managing radio traffic and coordinating with other units across the sector. 3 shots, 3 targets, and the entire enemy operation would collapse into chaos. Maria settled into her final firing position, using rubble from the building's damage to create a stable shooting platform. Her breathing slowed, her heart rate steadied, and the world narrowed to the precise calculations that would determine whether Alpha Team lived or died. Range, 612 meters. Wind, negligible. Target, stationary. Conditions, optimal. The first shot took Colonel Kassem's center mass as he was pointing at a map, probably planning the final assault on the water treatment plant. Through her scope, Maria saw him go down hard, the map falling from his hands as officers around him scrambled for cover. But she was already transitioning to her second target. The tactical coordinator was running toward cover behind one of the BTR-80s, but his route took him through a gap between vehicles. Maria led him by 18 inches and squeezed the trigger just as he reached the exposure point. The communications officer, realizing they were under sniper attack, was trying to reach the radio in his truck. It was exactly the predictable response that Maria had been counting on. Her third shot took him as he reached for the vehicle's door handle. The effect on the enemy command post was immediate and catastrophic. With their senior leadership eliminated and their communications disrupted, the Syrian army forces suddenly found themselves without coordination or clear orders. Radio chatter erupted across all frequencies as subordinate commanders tried to understand what was happening and establish new command authority. But Maria wasn't finished. Through her scope, she could see soldiers trying to evacuate the wounded officers and restore communications. She had 4 rounds remaining, and she intended to use them to ensure the enemy force couldn't reorganize. Her 4th shot eliminated a captain who was trying to take command of the operation. Her 5th took out the communications truck's primary radio antenna with a precision shot that severed the main cable. Her 6th shot disabled the command vehicle by puncturing its radiator, sending a cloud of steam into the air. With 1 round remaining, Maria made a decision that would become part of her legend. Instead of saving the ammunition for defense, she used it to eliminate the enemy's remaining helicopter. The Mi-24 Hind had been circling at what its pilot thought was a safe distance, probably waiting for orders from the command post that would never come. But it was hovering in a predictable pattern, and Maria had been tracking its movement for several minutes. The shot was borderline impossible, a moving target at extreme range, requiring perfect timing and calculation of multiple variables. But Maria had been trained by instructors who believed that impossible shots were just ordinary shots with more complicated math. She led the helicopter by 30 feet, calculated its descent rate and forward velocity, and squeezed the trigger just as it reached the precise point where all her calculations intersected. The bullet struck the helicopter's main rotor hub, causing immediate and catastrophic mechanical failure. The Hind auto-rotated to a hard landing in an empty lot, its crew surviving, but the aircraft completely disabled. The silence that followed was profound. After hours of continuous gunfire, explosions, and radio chatter, the sudden quiet was almost shocking. Maria lowered her rifle and keyed her radio for the final time. Raven's Nest, this is Ghost 7. Enemy command structure eliminated. Hostile forces are broken and withdrawing. Request extraction at grid reference 77 Bravo. Ghost 7, outstanding work. Extraction birds are already en route. ETA 15 minutes. Intelligence is very interested in your after-action report. Rodriguez appeared at Maria's position, looking at her with something approaching disbelief. Santos, in the space of about 4 hours, you eliminated, 40 enemy fighters, including their command staff, a counter-sniper, and 2 aircraft. Maria was already field stripping her weapon for the post-engagement maintenance that was second nature after years of combat operations. 43 confirmed eliminations, actually, but who's counting? 43. Chen's voice was filled with awe. That's like a whole company. Exactly one company, Maria corrected. The same company that was specifically organized and equipped to eliminate me. They spent months planning this operation, brought in specialized equipment and personnel, and coordinated with multiple supporting units. She looked up from her weapon maintenance. They forgot one important detail. What's that? Williams asked. I spent 2 years learning how to do exactly this kind of thing. They brought a company to a sniper fight. As the sound of approaching helicopters began to echo across the city, Maria reflected on the day's events. The operation that was supposed to eliminate Ghost 7 had instead demonstrated exactly why the Syrian rebels had put a $50,000 bounty on her head. More importantly, it had sent a message to every enemy force in the region. American snipers were not just dangerous individually. They were capable of changing the outcome of entire operations through precision application of force. Rodriguez was monitoring the radio traffic as extraction helicopters approached. Santos, they're calling you back to Kandahar for debriefing. Sounds like this engagement is going to change some policies. Maria nodded as she secured her equipment. She suspected this would be her last operation as an anonymous infantry specialist. After today's engagement, maintaining her cover would be impossible. Every enemy force in the region would know that Ghost 7 was not just a legend, but an active and extremely dangerous reality. But, as she prepared for extraction, Maria allowed herself a small smile. Alpha Team was going home alive, the enemy operation had been completely destroyed, and she just reminded everyone why American snipers were considered the most dangerous individual soldiers on any battlefield. The helicopters were landing now, kicking up dust clouds as they settled onto the makeshift landing zone Williams had marked. As Alpha Team prepared to board, Rodriguez had one final question. Santos, or should I say Ghost 7, what happens now? Maria shouldered her rifle and walked toward the waiting aircraft. Now, they'll probably send me somewhere that really needs a sniper. And hopefully, next time, the enemy won't be stupid enough to bring just one company. As the helicopter lifted off and Kandahar fell away below them, Maria was already thinking about her next assignment. Because somewhere in the world, there was probably another enemy force that needed to be reminded why precision marksmanship was still the most effective form of warfare ever developed. After all, they'd never know she was a sniper until it was far too late.